I came home to find my car clamped on my own property thanks to our power-hungry HOA president Barbara, but she had no idea. She was messing with a superior court judge who just uncovered her $42,000 neighborhood scam. What would you do when faced with a tyrant who's breaking the very laws they claim to enforce? Comment below where you're watching from. I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto Maple Lane. 3 neighbors stood in my driveway, pointing at my car. My stomach dropped as I pulled up behind them. What could possibly be happening now? "Judge Morrison, they got your car too," called Mrs. Patel, wringing her hands. Her family ran the best Indian restaurant in town, and she always brought me samosas when I helped her with permit paperwork. I parked my other car, an old Subaru I kept for bad weather, and hurried over. There it was, a bright orange metal boot locked tight around my Tesla's front wheel. A hot pink paper flapped under the windshield wiper. The bold black letters screamed, "Parking violation. $350 fine, removal fee. $150 vehicle. Parked in unauthorized location." "This has to be a mistake," I said, snatching the paper. "This is my house, my driveway." I had been a judge for 15 years, but I still believed in staying calm and checking facts before jumping to conclusions. That approach had kept me sane through hundreds of cases where people shouted and cried in my courtroom. But right now, my heart was racing, and I felt my face getting hot. "Barbara Wilson was here with 2 men about an hour ago," explained Mr. Johnson from next door. He leaned on his cane, shaking his head. "She had some kind of official-looking paper. Said your car wasn't supposed to be parked there because of some rule about the extended part of your driveway not being approved." I looked down at where my Tesla sat, on the newer concrete section. I'd added last month to make room for both my vehicles. I'd filed all the proper paperwork with the county, paid for all the permits, had everything inspected twice. "She's targeting everyone lately," whispered Mrs. Rodriguez, glancing nervously across the street. "Last week she left a $200 fine because my son's basketball hoop was 2 inches too tall." I followed her gaze to the 2-story colonial where Barbara Wilson lived. And there she was, peering through her pristine white blinds, phone held up like she was taking pictures. When our eyes met, the blinds snapped shut. "I'm going to talk to her," I said. "Be careful," Mrs. Patel warned. "Frank says she's been recording all her conversations to use against people." Frank was Barbara's husband, a quiet man who always looked like he wanted to disappear. I'd seen him at community meetings, sitting behind Barbara, never speaking unless she nodded at him first. I smoothed down my suit jacket and took 3 deep breaths. In court, I never showed anger. I wouldn't start now. This had to be a misunderstanding that could be fixed with a calm conversation. As I crossed the street, I mentally reviewed the HOA rules I'd memorized when I bought my house 5 years ago. There was nothing about driveway extensions being forbidden. In fact, 3 other houses on our street had them. I rang the doorbell, waiting with my hands clasped in front of me. The door opened a crack, and Barbara's perfectly made-up face appeared. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. "Judge Morrison," she said, not opening the door any wider. "I assume you're here about the parking violation?" The fact that she used my title meant she knew exactly who I was and what I did for a living. This wasn't ignorance. This was deliberate. "Barbara, there seems to be a mistake. My car is parked in my own driveway. The extension was approved by the county last month." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The county doesn't make the rules for Maple Lane Estates. The Homeowners Association does. And the Architectural Committee, which I chair, never approved your driveway extension. Section 8, Paragraph 3 of our bylaws clearly states that all exterior modifications must receive written approval." "I submitted the request forms in April," I said, fighting to keep my voice even. "I have copies with the receipt stamp." "The committee denied that request," Barbara said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You should have received notification. Perhaps it got lost in the mail?" I knew she was lying. I had the approval email saved on my phone, but something told me not to show my cards just yet. "I'll need to see the committee's written denial," I said. Barbara's smile tightened. "All official records can be requested through the proper channels. There's a form on our website. Processing takes 10-14 business days. Until then, the boot stays on, and the fine increases by $50 each day it remains unpaid." Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Frank at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched as he stared at a laptop. He glanced up, and the look in his eyes surprised me. It wasn't the blank stare I expected, but something closer to shame. He quickly looked away when Barbara turned to him. "Frank, could you bring me the Wilson file?" she called. As Frank shuffled papers, I noticed something odd on their dining room wall. A large whiteboard with all the neighbors' names listed in neat rows. Next to each name were dollar amounts and dates. Mrs. Rodriguez, $200, 512, Patel, 175. 430. Johnson. Warning. Ramp. 515. It was a tracking system for violations. My name had just been added, with the highest amount of all. Here's a copy of our current bylaws, Barbara said, handing me a thick document through the door crack. Pay special attention to the amendments from last quarter. The board has implemented stricter enforcement policies. I took the packet, noticing the date on the cover, March 2023. That was new. The last official bylaws I'd seen were from 2020. When were these changes voted on? I asked. I don't recall receiving notice of a special meeting. Barbara's eyes narrowed slightly. We sent emails to everyone. Again, perhaps you should check your spam folder. She started closing the door. The fine payment portal is on the website. Good day, Judge Morrison. The door shut firmly in my face. Through the window, I saw Barbara walk to the whiteboard, smiling as she picked up a red marker and circled my name. Walking back to my driveway, I flipped through the packet she'd given me. Something didn't add up. The paper felt different from official HOA documents I'd received before. The formatting was slightly off. And there, on page 17, was a whole section about driveway modifications that I'd never seen before. My neighbors were still waiting, watching anxiously. What did she say? Asked Mrs. Rodriguez. I looked up at them, then back at Barbara's house, where she was now taking photos of my clamped car from her front window. She said I broke the rules, I replied slowly, an idea forming. But I think Barbara Wilson is the one breaking laws, and she has no idea who she's picked a fight with. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the boot, the violation notice, and my driveway from multiple angles. Then I sent a text to my clerk at the courthouse. Need to pull county property records for Maple Lane Estates, especially HOA filings from the past 3 years. Urgent. As my phone buzzed with a reply, I looked at my worried neighbors and felt a strange sense of determination. How many people had Barbara bullied with these tactics? How much money had she collected through these questionable fines? Mrs. Patel, do you still have your violation notices? I asked. And Mr. Johnson, did you keep any documentation about your ramp situation? They nodded. Good. I think we all need to compare notes. I glanced back at Barbara's house, where the blinds were still slightly parted. Something tells me our HOA president has been writing her own rules for quite some time, and I need to know exactly how deep this goes. This wasn't the first time Barbara Wilson made my life miserable. The sight of that orange boot on my wheel brought back a flood of memories about how our neighborhood had changed since she took over the HOA 3 months ago. It all started the day after I installed my solar panels. I was drinking my morning coffee when an aggressive knock rattled my front door. There stood Barbara, her perfectly colored blonde hair not moving an inch despite the wind, clutching a thick binder labeled Covenant Violations in bold red letters. Judge Morrison, these solar panels are completely unacceptable, she said, not knowing I was actually a judge. I just went by Alex to my neighbors. They're an eyesore that diminishes our neighborhood appeal. I took a deep breath to stay calm. Barbara, I filed all the proper paperwork. The HOA approved these panels 3 weeks ago. I showed her the signed documents from the previous HOA president, Mr. Jenkins, who had retired to Florida. She snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them with narrowed eyes. This approval is from the old board. Things have changed. I'll need to bring this up at our next meeting. 2 days later, I received a violation notice with a $500 fine for unapproved exterior modifications. I appealed immediately, attaching copies of my approval documents, county permits, and even photos of 3 other homes in the neighborhood with similar panels. My appeal was denied. The letter stated, "The Architectural Committee has reviewed your case and determined that your solar installation does not meet current aesthetic standards." It was signed by Barbara and her 3 closest friends, who now controlled the 5-person board. I paid the fine to avoid further trouble, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The following week, Barbara cited me for my rose bushes being 2 inches taller than the approved garden height. Then it was my mailbox, which apparently was non-conforming, despite being the exact same model the previous owners had for 15 years. One evening, while walking my golden retriever, Cooper, I noticed something strange. Barbara seemed to be targeting specific homeowners while completely ignoring similar violations at other houses. The Johnsons had a wheelchair ramp installed for their teenage son who had been in an accident. Barbara called it an unsightly structure. Meanwhile, her friend Diane had built a much larger stone staircase without any issues. I started talking with other neighbors. The Rodriguez family had been fined for their children's bicycles being visible in their driveway. The Patels couldn't park their catering van overnight. Their family, business, while Barbara's adult son had parked his rusty project car on their lawn for weeks without consequence. She's running this place like her personal kingdom. Mrs. Patel whispered to me one day at the community mailboxes. We're afraid to speak up because she just increases the fines if you question her. Something wasn't right. I'd presided over dozens of property disputes in my courtroom, and I recognized the signs of someone abusing their authority. Normally, I kept my profession private. I didn't want special treatment or for neighbors to feel they couldn't be normal around me. But now, my legal background was ringing alarm bells. I decided to research our HOA's legal standing. Late at night, after long days in court, I pored over the community's founding documents, bylaws, and state regulations on homeowners associations. What I discovered was concerning. Many of Barbara's rules weren't actually in our official bylaws. One weekend, I drove to the county records office and requested the original filed documents for our subdivision. The clerk, recognizing me from court, brought them promptly. Comparing them to the updated guidelines Barbara had distributed, I found subtle but significant differences. She had essentially created her own stricter version without proper approval. I was gathering evidence quietly, taking photos of selectively enforced violations, keeping a spreadsheet of fines, and making copies of all communications. I noticed the HOA bank statements, which used to be included in our quarterly newsletters, had stopped being published when Barbara took over. When I installed my driveway extension last month, I followed every proper channel. I submitted detailed plans, got county permits, and even had the utility companies mark underground lines. The work was done professionally, matching our home's existing concrete perfectly. Barbara was out of town that week, so the acting HOA secretary had given me provisional approval. The night before my car got booted, I had overheard Barbara arguing with Frank at our community pool. "I don't care what the county approved," she hissed. "That driveway extension is not happening on my watch. Nobody gets to change things unless I say so." Frank had spotted me and quickly tried to change the subject, but Barbara hadn't noticed me there. Now, standing in my driveway staring at my clamped car, everything clicked. This wasn't about rules or neighborhood beauty. This was about control. Barbara was using the HOA as her personal tool to bend others to her will. I pulled out my phone and took photos of my car from every angle, making sure to capture my property lines clearly. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The boot had scratched my Tesla's custom rim. That wasn't just enforcement. That was property damage. As I zoomed in to photograph the scratch, a text message appeared from an unknown number. "Not just your car. Check your solar panels." I looked up to my roof and felt my stomach drop. 3 of my solar panels were visibly cracked, as if something had been thrown at them. Who would do this? And who had sent the warning text? Just then, Frank Wilson hurried past, walking his small terrier dog. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but he dropped something from his pocket that landed on my lawn. After he turned the corner, I picked it up, a folded note that read, "Barbara has gone too far. More of us want to help than you know. Meeting tomorrow at the Patels." I looked back at my damaged car and up at my broken solar panels. This had just become much bigger than a neighborhood dispute. With my judicial knowledge and growing community support, it was time to take a stand against Barbara's reign of HOA terror. But first, I needed to know exactly how deep her scheme really went. The orange boot on my Tesla's wheels seemed to mock me as rain began to fall. This wasn't just about a parking violation anymore. This was about Barbara Wilson thinking she could bully everyone in the neighborhood. With the violation notice crumpled in my fist, I stormed across the street, my judge's robe still on from court. I hadn't even had time to change. My finger jabbed the doorbell 3 times. Through the decorative glass, I could see Barbara's silhouette moving slowly, deliberately making me wait in the rain. When she finally opened the door, her fake smile didn't reach her eyes. "Judge Morrison, what a surprise visit. Is something wrong?" Her voice dripped with false concern, while her eyes flicked to my soaked robe with clear satisfaction. "You know exactly what's wrong, Barbara. You put a boot on my car that's parked in my driveway." I held up the soggy violation paper. "Explain this immediately." Barbara's smile widened as she leaned against her doorframe. "Well, if you had attended last month's HOA meeting instead of being at your mysterious job that keeps you so busy, you would know that all driveway extensions now require pre-approval." She examined her manicured nails. "Your little concrete addition wasn't submitted to the architectural committee. The rules apply to everyone." "That extension has been there for 6 weeks, I said, trying to keep my voice level despite my rising anger. No one said anything until today. "Enforcement takes time," Barbara replied with a dismissive wave. "We can't catch everything right away, but rules are rules." Behind her, I spotted her husband Frank appearing in the hallway. Frank was a quiet man who mostly stayed out of HOA business, but I'd always found him reasonable during our few interactions. His eyes widened seeing me standing there in my judicial robe. "Barbara," he whispered, pulling at her sleeve. "Maybe we should talk about this inside." That's Judge Moore. Not now, Frank. Barbara snapped without turning around. I'm handling a neighborhood violation. Frank's face went pale as he looked between me and his wife. He clearly recognized who I was from the courthouse, but Barbara remained clueless about my profession. The fine is $350, Barbara continued, sliding a freshly printed invoice toward me, and the boot removal fee is another $150 payable to the HOA immediately. If it's not paid within 48 hours, the amount doubles and we begin the process of placing a lien on your property. My jaw nearly dropped. $500 for parking on my own property? This is extortion, Barbara. It's enforcement of community standards, she corrected with a smug smile. Standards you agreed to when you bought your house. Perhaps if you read the covenant like I did, page by page, you wouldn't be in this situation. I took a deep breath. In court, I'd learned that losing your temper never helps your case. Show me exactly where in the covenant it says I can't park on my own driveway extension. Barbara's smile faltered for just a moment. Section 7, paragraph 12. All exterior modifications must be approved by the Architectural Committee. That's about modifications, not parking, I countered. And for your information, I did get approval for that extension from the county. I have permits and inspections all signed off. County approval doesn't override HOA requirements, Barbara said sharply. Our covenant supersedes county regulations for aesthetic matters. That statement was so legally incorrect I almost laughed. Almost. Frank stepped forward again, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Barbara, if he has county permits, maybe we should… Frank, Barbara hissed. Go check on dinner. Her husband hesitated, shooting me an apologetic look before disappearing back into the house. Look at what you've done to our street, Barbara continued, gesturing toward my house. That modern-looking car, those ugly solar panels, and now this extra-wide driveway. It's bringing down property values. Mrs. Jenkins across the street is already complaining she can't sell her house because our neighborhood is losing its character. I had to bite my tongue not to point out that Mrs. Jenkins' house hadn't sold because she was asking $100,000 above market value. Thunder rumbled in the distance as we stood in her doorway, locked in this power struggle. My judicial training had taught me to recognize when someone was drunk on authority, and Barbara was intoxicated. I decided to change tactics. Barbara, I understand you're passionate about our neighborhood's appearance. I am too, but there has to be a fair process. Can we discuss this reasonably? Perhaps look at the actual covenant together? Her eyes narrowed with suspicion at my sudden shift in tone. There's nothing to discuss. The violation stands. Pay the fine, follow the rules going forward, and we won't have these problems. From inside the house, I heard Frank's voice calling Barbara's name with urgency. She ignored him. The fine doubles if not paid in 48 hours, she added, already closing the door. And don't think about removing that boot yourself. That's tampering with HOA property and comes with an additional $1,000 fine. The door slammed in my face, leaving me standing in the increasingly heavy rain. Through the window, I could see Barbara and Frank in what appeared to be a heated argument. Frank kept pointing toward me while Barbara shook her head vigorously. As I walked back to my house, soaking wet and seething, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Judge Morrison, this is Frank Wilson. Barbara doesn't know I'm texting you. She's done this to 7 other families. We need to talk. Meet me at Westside Coffee tomorrow at 7 a.m.? I looked back at the Wilsons' house, where the argument seemed to be escalating behind the curtains. Was Frank reaching out as an ally, or was this a trap? Either way, I now knew this wasn't just about my car or my driveway. Barbara was running a neighborhood dictatorship, and it was time someone stood up to her. Someone who understood the law better than she ever could. The doorbell rang just as I was pouring myself a much-needed glass of wine. Who could be visiting at 8:30 p.m. on a Tuesday? Through the peephole, I spotted Frank Wilson, Barbara's husband, nervously looking over his shoulder like someone being followed. This was unexpected. Frank? I asked, opening the door just enough to speak. Is everything okay? His hands were shaking. Judge Morrison, I need to talk to you. It's about Barbara and the HOA. Can I come in? Please? I don't want anyone to see me here. I hesitated but stepped aside. Frank had never been unkind to me, unlike his wife. As he hurried in, I noticed dark circles under his eyes and his rumpled shirt, very different from his usual neat appearance. You know who I am? I asked, closing the door. Yes, of course. You dismissed my speeding ticket last year. I recognized you immediately when you moved in. But Barbara doesn't know what you do for a living. He lowered his voice, even though we were alone. She thinks you're just another person she can push around. I gestured toward my living room. Would you like some water, Frank? No, thank you. I can't stay long. Barbara thinks I'm at the hardware store. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos. Look at these. Barbara's been keeping records of everyone she's targeting. I scrolled through images of a spreadsheet with neighbor names, violations, and fine amounts. The list was shockingly long. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. Frank ran his hand through his thinning hair. "Because it's getting worse, and I can't stop her. The Rodriguez family, you know them? The nice couple with 3 kids at the end of the street? Barbara's threatening them with daily fines if they don't take down the basketball hoop they put up for their son's birthday." "That seems excessive for a basketball hoop," I said, remembering the joyful sounds of children playing just days ago. "It doesn't end there," Frank continued, his words coming faster now. "The Patels can't park their catering van overnight, even though it's how they make their living. Mrs. Johnson, the widow who uses a wheelchair since her stroke. Barbara's demanding she remove her wheelchair ramp because it ruins the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood." My stomach turned. "A wheelchair ramp? That's not just mean-spirited. Frank, that could be illegal under accessibility laws." "I know." Frank's voice cracked. "I've tried talking to her, but she won't listen. She's high on the power. Do you know she keeps a pair of binoculars by our front window? She watches everyone, waiting for the smallest mistake." I thought of my clamped car sitting in my driveway. "How long has this been going on?" "It started small about 2 years ago when she became president. A warning here, a small fine there. But now," he pulled out another phone, an older model. "This is Barbara's personal phone. She left it charging when she went to her book club. Look at these texts." The messages showed conversations between Barbara and 3 other HOA board members, planning who to target next, how to change bylaws without proper notification, even joking about neighbors' financial struggles with the fines. "Has anyone tried to stop her?" I asked, taking careful mental notes. Frank's shoulders slumped. "People are scared. The Thompsons tried to speak up at a meeting last month. The next day they got violation notices for 5 different things. Their teenage daughter's car was towed from their own driveway while she was at school. It cost them $275 to get it back." "That's intimidation," I said quietly. "Exactly. And there's more." Frank lowered his voice even further. "I think there's something wrong with the HOA accounts. Barbara used to let me help with the paperwork, but lately she's been secretive. Last week I saw a bank statement for an account I didn't recognize. It had over $30,000 in it. My judicial mind clicked into high gear. This wasn't just bossy neighbor behavior. This sounded like potential fraud. "Frank, why are you telling me all this? Why now?" He looked down at his hands. "Because when I saw your car clamped today, something snapped. I've been a coward, letting Barbara bully everyone. But you didn't deserve that. Nobody does." His eyes met mine. "And honestly, I think you might be the only person who can stand up to her and win." I considered my options carefully. Getting involved in neighborhood drama wasn't my style, but this went beyond simple disagreements. If what Frank was saying was true, people's rights were being violated. "I can't promise anything, Frank, but I'd like to learn more. Do you think others would be willing to talk to me?" For the first time since arriving, Frank smiled slightly. "Are you kidding? They'd line up around the block. Everyone's just waiting for someone brave enough to lead the charge. I made a decision. Bring them to my house tomorrow night at 7. Tell them to bring any violation notices, receipts for fines, and copies of any communications from the HOA. Tell them it's completely voluntary and confidential." Frank stood up, looking both relieved and terrified. "What if Barbara finds out?" "Let me worry about that," I said firmly. "Right now we need information. Oh, and Frank? Take photos of those documents on Barbara's phone if you can do it safely." As he headed to the door, Frank paused. "Judge Morrison, you should know, Barbara has friends at City Hall. She brags about it all the time." I nodded. "Thank you for the warning. But remember, I have friends at the courthouse." After Frank left, I stood at my window watching his car disappear down the street. My clamped Tesla sat in the driveway like a monument to injustice. I took out a legal pad and began making notes. Barbara Wilson had declared war on the wrong person. Tomorrow night, we'd begin planning our counterattack. But as I turned away from the window, a movement across the street caught my eye. Barbara was standing in her front yard, staring directly at my house with her phone to her ear. Had she seen Frank leaving? A chill ran down my spine as our eyes met across the distance. She didn't wave or nod, she just smiled slowly, then turned and walked back inside her house. My kitchen table disappeared under stacks of papers as I prepared for our neighborhood meeting. The orange boot still locked my Tesla in place outside, a daily reminder of Barbara's power trip. I couldn't sleep last night, so I'd spent hours digging through every scrap of HOA paperwork I'd saved since moving in. Something didn't add up. Barbara kept quoting rules I couldn't remember agreeing to when I bought my house. What if the rules she's enforcing aren't even real? I mumbled to myself, rubbing my tired eyes. That's when it hit me. I needed to see the original bylaws filed with the county, not just the packet Barbara handed out each year. I called in a favor from my court clerk. Janet, I need the official copy of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA bylaws on file with the county. It's urgent. 2 hours later, Janet texted me she'd emailed the documents. My hands shook as I printed them, laying the official county-filed papers next to Barbara's version. I knew it! I gasped, nearly knocking over my coffee. The differences jumped out immediately. Barbara's version had an entire, extra section on aesthetic standards that didn't exist in the official document. The real bylaws had no restrictions on driveway parking, solar panels, basketball hoops, or many other so-called violations she'd been fining people for. The doorbell rang, startling me. Frank stood there with a thick manila envelope. I brought what you asked for, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Barbara's at her weekly spa appointment. She won't be back for hours. Inside the envelope were years of HOA financial records. Frank had access as the treasurer, though Barbara had gradually taken over most duties. She doesn't know I kept copies of everything, he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. Something felt wrong for a long time, but I was afraid to rock the boat. As we spread the bank statements across my dining room table, a disturbing pattern emerged. The HOA collected about $500 monthly from each of the 78 homes in our community, money meant for landscaping, pool maintenance, and common area upkeep. But there was a separate account statement labeled compliance revenue. This is where all the fines go, Frank explained. Over $42,000 collected just in the last year. I felt sick as I noticed only one signature required on this account. Barbara Wilson. Where does this money go, Frank? I asked. He pulled out more papers, receipts for a kitchen remodel, a luxury cruise, designer handbags, all paid from the compliance account. She's not just making up rules, I said, the realization hitting me like a gavel striking wood. She's stealing from our neighbors. This isn't just HOA overreach, it's fraud. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Elena Rodriguez. Barbara just fined us. $500 for our son's birthday balloons. Says they're violating the visual harmony rules. We can't afford this. I quickly took photos of everything Frank had brought. The more I dug, the worse it got. Barbara had been targeting families who she knew couldn't afford lawyers, many immigrants, single parents, elderly residents on fixed incomes. Look at this pattern, I pointed out to Frank. The Patels got fined right after they opened their catering business. The Johnsons after Mrs. Johnson's accident when they installed the wheelchair ramp. It's like she's punishing people for any sign of change or need. Frank looked down, guilt written across his face. She said it was about maintaining property values. I believed her at first, but then what? I pressed. Last Christmas, I heard her on the phone bragging to her sister about her neighborhood ATM and how easy it was to scare people into paying whatever she demanded. His voice cracked. I've been too afraid to stand up to her. She's not the same person I married. My doorbell rang again. I quickly hid the documents under the sofa cushions. Elena Rodriguez stood there with tears streaming down her face, her son Diego hiding behind her legs. Judge Morrison, I'm sorry to bother you, she said, but Diego says he saw you arguing with Mrs. Wilson about your car. Are you in trouble with her too? I invited them in, noticing Diego's birthday balloon still clutched in his small hand. How old are you today, buddy? I asked, kneeling to his level. 7, he said shyly. But Mrs. Wilson said our balloons are breaking the rules and making the neighborhood ugly. My heart broke as Elena explained. They'd already paid 3 fines this year, for wind chimes, for Diego's bicycle left on their front porch, and now for birthday decorations. We're falling behind on our mortgage, Elena whispered so Diego couldn't hear. But we're afraid she'll put a lien on our house if we don't pay. As more neighbors began arriving for our planned meeting, similar stories poured out. The Mendozas fined for their grandmother visiting for more than 2 weeks. The Clarks penalized because their new baby's crying. Disrupted neighborhood tranquility, each story more outrageous than the last. I quietly pulled the documents back out, watching faces change from confusion to shock to anger as I explained what Frank and I had discovered. She can't do this to us, Mrs. Patel exclaimed, her husband nodding vigorously beside her. Actually, she can't, I confirmed. None of these rules she's enforcing even exist in our real bylaws. The room fell silent as I held up the bank statements, showing where their hard-earned money had really gone. Barbara Wilson hasn't just been making our lives miserable, I said, my judicial calm barely containing my anger. She's been stealing from all of us to fund her luxury lifestyle. Mr. Johnson wheeled his wife forward. So what do we do now, Judge? She has all the power. I smiled for the first time in days. Not anymore. Not when we stand together. As I laid out my plan, I noticed Frank looking at his watch nervously. She'll be home soon, he said. And she always checks the security cameras to see where I've been. That's when I realized, if Barbara was monitoring everyone this closely, she might already know about our meeting. And if she discovered what we'd found before we could act. The front window suddenly illuminated with headlights pulling into my driveway. A car door slammed. It's her, Frank whispered, his face draining of color. She's back early. I arrived at the community center 30 minutes early, my heartbeat racing as I arranged my documents on the table. Tonight would change everything. The room was already filling up fast. Neighbors I'd never seen at meetings before were pouring in, whispering among themselves. My clamped car had become the talk of the neighborhood, but they didn't know what bombshell I was about to drop. "Judge, are you sure about this?" Frank whispered, handing me a cup of water. His hands were shaking. "Barbara has friends on the town council. Truth doesn't care about connections," I replied, watching Mrs. Johnson struggle to maneuver her wheelchair through the narrow doorway that Barbara had repeatedly refused to widen. At exactly 7 p.m., Barbara strutted in wearing her signature red blazer, clipboard clutched to her chest. Her smile faltered when she saw the crowd. I counted silently. 97 residents, the biggest turnout in our HOA's history. She tapped the microphone 3 times. "Well, this is a surprise. I'm delighted to see such community involvement," she said with a plastic smile. "We have a packed agenda tonight, beginning with the new flower arrangements for the entrance." "Point of order," I called out, standing up. The room hushed instantly. "I believe we need to address some urgent business first." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "You're out of order, Mr. Morrison. We follow the agenda here." "That's Judge Morrison, actually," I said clearly. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. "And according to Bylaw 5.3, any member may request agenda adjustments with the support of 10 residents." Hands shot up around the room, not just 10, but dozens. Barbara's face flushed red. "Fine, you have 5 minutes." I walked to the front, connecting my laptop to the projector. I won't need 5 minutes to show the truth. For months, many of us have received violation notices for rules that seemed increasingly strict. On the screen, I displayed the official HOA bylaws filed with the county clerk's office. This is our actual governing document. Next slide, Barbara's version that she'd been distributing. And this is what we've been told to follow. I highlighted the differences, section by section. No restrictions on driveway parking in the official version. No ban on basketball hoops. No limitations on reasonable accommodations like wheelchair ramps. "This is ridiculous," Barbara snapped, trying to turn off the projector. "These are clerical differences. Clerical differences that have cost this community over $40,000 in fines." I continued calmly, switching to the next slide showing bank statements. Money that wasn't spent on community improvements. The room erupted. Mr. Patel stood up, waving a stack of violation notices. "We sold our second van because you said we couldn't park it overnight. My wife has been taking the bus to her catering jobs for months," Mrs. Rodriguez shouted. "My kids can't even play basketball in our own driveway because you threatened to put a lien on our house." Barbara banged her gavel repeatedly. "Quiet! These accusations are baseless. He's just angry about his fancy Tesla getting clamped." "Am I?" I switched to the next slide, a separate bank account statement Frank had provided. "This account at First Regional Bank was opened 3 years ago, right after you became president. Every month, thousands in fine money gets transferred here instead of the community account." Complete silence fell over the room. Barbara's face drained of color. That's for special projects," she stammered. "Like your kitchen renovation?" Frank's voice came from the back. He stepped forward, holding up photos. "Or your vacation to Maui last spring?" "I've kept the receipts, Barbara. All of them." Barbara lunged for her purse. "This meeting is adjourned." "Actually," I said, nodding to 2 uniformed officers who had quietly entered the back of the room. "There are some people here who'd like to ask you questions about those special projects." "You can't do this to me!" Barbara screamed, backing toward the exit. "Do you know who my brother-in-law is?" "He's the deputy mayor. And my courtroom has seen plenty of deputy mayor's relatives," I replied evenly. "The law applies to everyone, Barbara." In desperation, she grabbed the HOA laptop. "I'm taking this!" "All the records are here." Frank stepped forward. "I already backed everything up, Barbara. It's over." The officers approached her calmly. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us to answer some questions." As they escorted a sobbing Barbara out, she turned to the crowd. "You'll regret this. All of you! Your property values will tank without my leadership." The door closed behind her, and for a moment nobody spoke. Then Mrs. Johnson rolled her wheelchair forward. "Judge Morrison, I've lived here for 15 years. Never once has that woman looked me in the eye. She called my ramp an unsightly contraption and fined me every month." Her voice broke. "What happens now?" I looked around at my neighbors, some in tears, others stunned, many looking hopeful for the first time in years. "Now, we rebuild, together." I opened the official bylaws again. "We need an emergency board election. But first, I think we all deserve to know exactly what's been happening to our money. Phones came out, recording everything. The local news would be here within the hour. Frank had tipped them off. By morning, Barbara's reign of terror would be front-page news. As the meeting continued into the night, I stepped outside briefly for air. My Tesla sat in the parking lot, still wearing its bright orange boot like a badge of honor. I smiled, remembering Barbara's face, when she realized who she'd been threatening all this time. But the night wasn't over yet. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? Barbara's not the only one with power in this town. Check your mailbox. Who else was involved in this scheme? And how deep did the corruption really go?" 6 weeks later, I pulled into my driveway, the same spot where my car had been clamped. You won't believe what happened after that HOA meeting. The next morning, police cars lined our quiet street. 2 officers escorted Barbara from her home in handcuffs while neighbors peeked through curtains. It turned out the $42,000 was just the beginning. "Judge Morrison," called Mrs. Rodriguez, rushing over with her son Miguel. "We put up our basketball hoop yesterday. The kids are so happy." Her eyes welled with tears. "We were afraid to even plant flowers before." I smiled, remembering how just days after the showdown meeting, 3 moving trucks appeared on our street. Barbara's closest allies on the board, the Thompsons, the Clarks, and the Reeds, all suddenly needed to relocate for work. Funny how quickly rats abandon a sinking ship. "Did you see the news last night?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, her eyes wide. "They interviewed Frank. He showed them everything." I had seen it. Frank Wilson had transformed from Barbara's nervous shadow into a man with purpose. He'd turned over years of fake documents, altered bank statements, and even recordings of Barbara threatening homeowners. "I was too scared to stand up to her," he admitted on camera. "But seeing Judge Morrison fight for our neighborhood gave me courage." My phone buzzed with a text from District Attorney Henson. "Grand jury just returned indictments, all 4 facing felony charges." "Good work, Eliza. I hadn't sought this outcome, but justice comes in many forms." As I grabbed my mail, I noticed the Rodriguez family wasn't the only one embracing freedom. The Patel's catering van sat proudly in their driveway, their family business logo no longer covered by a tarp. The sweet smell of Mrs. Patel's famous curry drifted across our cul-de-sac. Before Barbara's reign of terror, the Patels had run a successful home catering business. When they refused to pay a made-up commercial vehicle fine, Barbara had threatened to put a lien on their house. "Judge! Judge!" called 7-year-old Lily Johnson, wheeling quickly down her new ramp. Her mother followed behind, waving a letter. I walked over to greet them. "We wanted you to be the first to know," Mrs. Johnson said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The neighborhood voted yesterday. I'm the new HOA president." "That's wonderful news," I replied genuinely. Mrs. Johnson had been one of Barbara's first victims when she moved in last year. As a wheelchair user, she needed a ramp, but Barbara had blocked it, claiming it would lower property values. "We're having a block party this weekend to celebrate all the changes," Mrs. Johnson continued. "The first official act of the new board was to approve it unanimously. A block party. When was the last time our neighborhood had celebrated anything together?" Barbara had canceled the annual 4th of July picnic 3 years ago, claiming it created excessive noise and trash. "I have something for you," Mrs. Johnson said, handing me an official envelope with the HOA logo. Inside was a formal apology letter, a refund check for all my violation fees, and a thank you card signed by over 40 neighbors. Just then, a moving truck rumbled down our street, stopping in front of Barbara's house. Frank was outside directing movers to load boxes. "Frank, how are you holding up?" I called, walking over. He looked different somehow, standing straighter, his voice stronger. "Better than I have in years, Judge Morrison. The divorce papers were filed last week." He lowered his voice. "Did you know Barbara had secret accounts in the Caymans? The forensic accountants found nearly $200,000, siphoned from communities all over the county. She's been running this scam for decades." I was shocked but not surprised. A woman walking her golden retriever approached us. I recognized her as Ms. Rivera, the retired school teacher who lived at the end of our street. "Judge Morrison," she said, "I never spoke up during those horrible meetings because Barbara threatened to report my garden as a violation if I did. She said she'd make me tear out my vegetables." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you for giving us our neighborhood back." As I headed inside, my phone rang. It was a reporter from the local news. "Judge Morrison, we're doing a feature on HOA abuse across the county. Your case has inspired homeowners in 12 other communities to audit their boards. Would you comment?" I thought about it. This isn't about me. It's about remembering that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. That evening, I sat on my front porch watching kids ride bikes freely up and down the street. The Nguyen family was setting up for their daughter's 16th birthday party, something Barbara would have shut down immediately for noise concerns. The Jacksons were installing solar panels similar to mine, and the Smiths had finally painted their front door, the bright red they'd wanted for years. Mrs. Johnson wheeled up my driveway with a plate of cookies. First monthly neighborhood meeting is tomorrow night. Nothing fancy, just coffee and conversation about what we want our community to be. She smiled. We're lucky to have you, Judge Morrison. I looked around at our transformed neighborhood. Children laughing, families talking across driveways, the faint sound of music from the Nguyens party. I'm just a neighbor who believes in justice, I replied, thinking about how different things were just 6 weeks ago. Even when it starts in our own driveways. As the sun set over our liberated neighborhood, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes, standing up to a bully doesn't just solve your own problem. It frees everyone else too.